so this will be available to you shortly afterwards as well as the slides that I'm going to be walking you through today. So this webinar is all about how we use ID to lead others. So when I was preparing this, I thought about it from the point of view of, firstly, we're talking lead, not manage. And I call it out because in a crisis, it's sort of fairly well known that people tend to over-manage and under-lead. And so we need to pivot and make sure that we're actually leading. So this webinar will be about leading, not so much managing in a virtual environment. The second thing that I would call out is it's not about facilitating meetings. That is next week's webinar. So how to actually facilitate a virtual meeting. We're going to do this. Is about leading people, but whether you're in charge of people as a leader or whether you just are part of a team and you want to show up with more leadership, I'm covering that as well. So this is about leading. That's why I specifically didn't say leading teams, but leading in a virtual environment. I will just show you the culture chart. It's a good place to start. For those of you very familiar with ID, you know, as we do these webinars, they tend to be balancing out to becoming a very equal spread of energy of all 8 directions of an ID bar chart here. So you can see this is fairly well representing all 8 directions, the most balanced group we've had so far. I should use that term lightly. I'm not saying it is the most balanced group, most balanced ID group. Okay, so when I thought about putting this together, and by the way, I've sat through a couple of webinars myself on leading virtual teams. So it was just good fortune that earlier this week I sat through a group of about, how many were there? About 50 CEOs in this webinar that was run globally on leading virtual teams. So it was really good for me to hear what other people were doing. They then shared best practices from people like McKinsey's and Bain, who have put out material on leading virtually. So I've actually been across all of that material to then put together what I'm sharing with you guys today. But of course, we have the benefit of having an ID perspective in what we do to overlay it. And I will also say that today's going to be a little bit different to what I've done in previous webinars and what we're going to be doing next week, in that it's not so much a drill down on the 4 different instinctive drives or the 8 directions. When you think about being true to ID, there's also the protocol of just what ID stands for, about being true to yourself and being at your very best. And so that's going to be much more of the flavor of this particular webinar. It's also the first time that we're running this webinar. So I'd love to build some of this with you. If I'm going to throw out the structure for it, I've got content, but I'm very interested first to also get perspectives from each of you guys and make this more interactive. I'm sure that's, you know, a better experience for you as well. But hopefully I've got some good content to share with you. Some of it is original and some of it is sharing from what I've been able to gather from other people. So hopefully it represents the most up-to-date material you can find. In terms of breaking this down, I think there's relevance here around, you know, how you show up. It was very interesting to me that for all of the strategies people had to share around and the discussion around leading virtually, the overwhelming emphasis was on, but first, you have to show up well. You have to be at your best. And I would say they made it sound like, and I would agree with this, that it was far and away like 70 to 80% of the equation. That, you know, you can put your emphasis on other people and what you do for them. But if you're coming from a place where you're not at your best, everything else is compromised. But I do think there is still in all a very deliberate focus that needs to be on the team. And there's a very significant piece on culture, which I'm calling out. That did not come out from the other material that I experienced or read, but I can see where on our own experience with working with teams and having done this for quite a few years now, culture is a very relevant component of what needs more emphasis when you're working virtually. So let's get into the whole piece around self. Already made the comment there about in a crisis we tend to overmanage and underlead. I think that's good to remember. So it's even for people who are natural leaders, leadership is something that needs a lot of intention and purpose to it. So I've broken the slides into this type of format. The first is to talk about, so what's different leading virtually to leading live? And then what is it you need to do to accommodate those differences? And then how do you go about doing them? And one of the things I've found, those of you who have been trained up on ID, we talk about level 4 questioning. I would also say there's like level 4 strategy. So there's what you do, and then, well, how do you do that? And then, well, how do you do that? And then how do you do that? So I'm not, you know, we haven't got the time today to get into the micro steps, but hopefully there's enough direction here that if we get to like level 2 of the how, you might have your own experience around what you do for level 3 or level 4 where it's relevant. If you want any more support on that, I'm certainly happy to help and provide, you know, and productize that. So if you send me a question by email or in a discussion, I'll put something out on YouTube or on a podcast to cover that off for the broader audience. So when you think about for yourself, you know, leading virtually to doing it when you've got a team in front of you live, let me throw up some of the differences that I noticed, but you might want to think about what do you think's different for you, or what do you observe even for customers or in these situations? And let's have a discussion about this. Here's some things that I've observed. The first is it's much easier to hide and be invisible. You know, no one's watching. If you're working from home or they're not in front of you all the time, that can affect how you dress. It can affect how often you're seen. So it's not only easier to hide and be invisible, it's equally, maybe more so, easy to be misunderstood. This is a big one. The second one, I think a lot of people, not everyone realizes this, but there's a massive dilution of energy. When you're working on a camera or working remotely, the change in communication that occurs when people can't see you and experience you physically is massive. I remember years ago when I was doing some speaker training and I was being videoed. When you look at the animation that you have on this side of the camera and you watch what comes out when they play it back to you, there's a massive difference. And so if you're going to be a passionate, animated, even authentic leader, how that passion, animation, and authenticity is coming across to your audience when it's virtual is significantly diluted. And so even more about, well, you need to be on your game and really make sure you believe in what you're about, because if there's any incongruency in your messaging, it's going to be significantly watered down when you're working virtually. And the third thing I would call out is the blur between the personal and work boundaries that's already occurring. You know, people are finding out that when they're not really going to work and going home from work, and kids are coming in on the camera, and when do I get space to actually have family time? It's causing frustration already. So I would just say it's one of the differences that people are noticing for themselves, let alone their teams, that we'll need to intentionally do something about in the what to do column if you're going to be effective, you know, managing your own personal boundaries and being sustainable for however long you work this way. Does anyone either see for themselves or have experienced other differences that are occurring for them by working virtually?
I think communication has to be much more intentional when you're working virtually. You know, if you're in an office, you can just stop by somebody's desk. It'll remind you that maybe there's something that you needed to tell that person. But when it's virtual and you can't see them, you need to be very specific and you need to carve out time for people so that they feel valued.
It's very good. I missed who was saying that. I'm sorry, I missed that.
Jackie.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. I can see you now. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay.
Hi, Paul, it's Steve. I found that there's a greater intensity in the video conferencing. Our business has instigated compulsory video in all meetings, so therefore you go to a lot of video conferencing 4 or 5 hours a day, and rather than dilution of energy from just being remote, you actually have an increased intensity of energy, and actually at the end of the day or the week, you're a lot more emotionally drained, and it takes a lot more emotional energy to be present.
Ah, that's really interesting. So are you saying you noticed the opposite of what I was saying, Steve?
Yes, you have a dilution of energy from the intensity of interactions is increased. So you get to the end of the week and you go, man, why am I so tired?
Very good. Very good. I like that distinction. Thank you. And I know, John, go on, sorry.
Yeah, Yeah, this is John. I noticed, like, I've noticed a few things. One maybe positive and one more challenging. On the challenging one, I have noticed that because there's not as much commuting, people aren't, you know, there's almost this work has become more intense. I think that was the point earlier made, but I think also just it seems like it's increased just in volume because it sort of almost like you have to be much more respectful of people's time because it's easy to just wake up, get on the phone, and suddenly it's 9 o'clock at night. There's not this nascent understanding that we used to have of, oh, people have to travel and people are flying, and
Right.
so I think it's become more intense. That's a negative. On the positive side, one thing I've noticed that's a difference that has super surprised me is seeing everybody's living room and working space has oddly democratized relationships in a weird way. Like there's a lot of senior people I'm on calls with and I'm like, wow, now I know what your kitchen looks like. And it's almost like it's a different, newer, unexpected kind of intimacy than we had in the non-virtual.
You worked a lot virtually before, John. So is that right, or am I misunderstanding how you work?
I did work a lot virtually, but for me, I almost think about the energy that you talked about. I get energy from interpersonal connections as part of my ID and my personality. So I always think about energy like going down a transformer, going down a power line. And when it was like, when I was in person, it was like the energy hit a transformer and it got an accelerator. So then I could be virtual. And then it would get another accelerator the next time I was in person. But now that I don't have those in-person things, I've had to create accelerators of my own, like just having a daily stand-up, or now we've gone to 3 times a week so you can see each other with no agenda. Just like, how was your weekend? What are you doing? We're making time to have the informal chit chat, and it's an odd act. Like, let's chit chat on Monday at 8:30. It's an odd thing to do, but that's sort of what we're trying.
Very human thing to do. It's good. It's good that you're doing it. It's good that you're even aware to notice it and then do something about it. Well done.
Yeah, we call those a water cooler meetings, and we actually have planned those. Yeah,
right.
run by the MD. It's a very good strategy.
Good on you. Good on you. So your comments here, guys, because it's recorded, I'll capture them and add them into the slides here so that it adds for both your benefit, but for everyone else that might then see this as well, and we help make it a broader difference. Anybody else? So what can you do about it? If these are things that are shifting, what are some things that you can do? And you might have some suggestions here to speak to the things that you were just talking about as well. I have got comments on the team and the culture piece later, but just for yourself, I would net it out like this. You need to be more. This is, it's all very convenient at times, or for many people, to work from home, but what it's also called, work virtually, I should say, but what it's calling us to be is to be much more. We need to be more explicit, more transparent, more authentic, more in stride, and more empowering. People need to be even more empowered when they're working from home. The trust factor is huge. And so it is a shift in how you're leading. So to just work through these, to be more explicit, and I said here, especially on your motives, because John, you called out earlier in the chat, it's not as easy to get the benefit of the doubt when people can't see you and are there with you in the moment. And so being really clear about why you're doing what you're doing. I found even for myself, there's times when I'm saying something and people can't always see your face, even when you're on video. It doesn't mean they've got you on the screen. And they can't tell from your voice or your words that you might be joking about something. So you've got to sort of say, hey, I'm actually joking about that. You probably couldn't tell, but I was really just, having a joke. You've got to be overly explicit to make sure that your communication is clear. Transparent, because, people go off. You have all sorts of other conversations that aren't as easy to loop back with people on and close that loop. So you've got to be extra conscious of being transparent. With the authenticity, people they can see something's not right if you're not there, but if you're going to be at your very best in terms of the energy, you've got to make sure you're in a place of, really believing in what you're about. I'll talk about how to do that in a minute. Being in stride goes without saying, but that is, very much where you can use your ID to make sure that you're coming from that place of at least an 8 out of 10 on our peak performance scale. And then, of course, empowering. I'd say it's really hard for people that lack trust at the best of times, but it's even more challenging when you're working virtually because you can't see people. And if you have a frame on people that, you know, you just fundamentally have an issue with them, like if you were to map your team and say, who are the people that I really trust and I feel comfortable empowering? And then at the other end of the spectrum, the people that I really have concern about. Maybe when you're working together live, you could sort of patch that up here and there. But when you're working virtually, I really counsel you to clean that up and give the coaching or training or make the changes in responsibilities that are needed so that you can more fully empower and trust that empowerment with people. That's huge. What about you guys? What do you think about what you can do differently?
Paul, I think it depends on your starting position. I mean, you know, from personal experience, yeah, the lines between personal and work have been blurred for quite a while, and so you end up in a position where, you know, day to day and not virtual, you're doing, you know, many more hours than you're required to, and so it's easier to hide and being visible. Actually, embracing that means that you can actually get some semblance of balance back in life. And so I'm finding now that I'm able to more easily balance, you know, workloads at home and other things around the place to put a bit more normality back in my process, because I've got that ability to kind of switch off now. Even though I'm on permanently, it's still switch off and do some stuff because people aren't expecting that immediate response now.
Good for you. Says a lot about your consistency, Gilberto. I knew your voice when you started talking after you've been on the third webinar. This is really cool. Well done.
This is Jackie. When you talk about the personal work boundaries, you can establish a physical boundary that helps with that. Set one particular spot in your home where you're going to work, and that is where you go to work each day. Set the hours that you want to be there, and then walk away from it. Maybe it's a room that you shut up. I mean, if you have the luxury. I mean, obviously, you know, if you're in a smaller confined space, you may not be able to do that. But, you know, I've worked from home for a very long time, for 14 years. And my office is my basement. And when I go downstairs to my basement, that is my work. And when I come upstairs, then that is my home life.
Good on you, Jackie. That's very good. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so let's talk about how you can do some of these things. So I've just got a few things here to share with you, and you might have some other ideas as well, like what you guys were just sharing then. But the ones that occur to me that I can, you know, call out for you. I think you've got to be very conscious of being on, almost like you're on stage. And I'm talking here about, you know, particularly when you are in meetings, but also when you're communicating. If you're aware of this dilution factor, aware of the need to be more empowering, aware of how easy it can be to miscommunicate, you've got to be super conscious. You know, I remember years ago someone saying to me that when you do communicate, only 7% of the message that you convey comes from the words that you use. 38% comes from your tone of voice, and 55% comes from your physiology. And whether those numbers are exactly correct is not the point. It's that the vast majority of your communication, the effectiveness of it, has to do with the non-verbal. And when you aren't in front of people, you need to be very aware of, you know, of that factor and step it up. So being on and very purposeful about that, making sure that you're very aligned with what your own purpose is a part of that. So we have a model called the Peak Performance Indicator. I think most of you are aware of it, but it's on a scale of 0 to 10. What's your number? 10 being I'm really in stride, you know, I'm in the zone, as the athletes would say. I'm flying, I'm loving what I do, I feel really energized by it. And a 1 out of 10 would be, I can hardly get out of bed to do this. You know, I'm hauling myself through life. What's your number? And what we found doing this with thousands of people around the world is that if you want to be an effective leader, you need to come from a place of 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. And if you say that to yourself, even right now, on a scale of 0 to 10, what's my number? If it's not an 8, then look at your ID to know, okay, so what's missing for me? It's because there are certain needs that you have based on your ID that are not being fully met at the moment, whatever they might be. And if you have that as a cheat sheet, and you can look at that and say, well, I'm only a 5 out of 10 today. What's missing for me? Is it challenge if you're an improviser? Is it If you're a verifier, it might be that you're just not on top of things. You need to make a list and get yourself organized. Whatever it might be, what do you need to do to move that number? Because you can move that number very quickly in the same way that can be compromised quickly. But I would just challenge you to be an effective leader, especially working virtually. You want to make sure that every day and throughout the day, you're at a place of an 8 or more out of 10. And that's not just based on your ID. That's a part of it. But as I say there, you know, the bullet point from the bottom, you have to take care of yourself as well. Your fitness, your nutrition, making sure you get enough sleep, making sure you are getting variety in your day and you're not just doing work the entire time. Those pieces as well all affect how the degree to which you feel on top of your game and really at your best. Speaking from the heart and being, you know, I have a saying that vulnerability builds rapport. And, you know, John was just talking about the fact that even seeing people's personal space is creating conversations and an intimacy. Intimacy is an interesting word to use in a business context, but, you know, it's important for your relationships. And so does vulnerability do that. When you speak openly, you might feel like you're, well, should I really be saying this, you know, and sharing this part of my soul with somebody? But what I've found as a universal law is that vulnerability builds rapport. And when rapport is one of the things that can be easily hidden and compromised when you're working virtually, I'd challenge you to be even more vulnerable than what you might normally be. And it builds that rapport that can otherwise be compromised. Seek feedback about it. And when it comes to working with people, you know, tap into some of the resources that we're building and have online now that will be available to you, you know, at any time, because we've already done some webinars on being at your best, for example, in a virtual environment. I'm not getting into that today because we've already covered that in a previous webinar. But if you haven't seen them or weren't on those webinars, just know that that resource is there and you can go and tap into that. Anyone got any comments you'd like to add or questions?
I do, Paul. I don't know if it fits in, but I noticed with our work that a lot of people have meetings because it's Tuesday and it's 11, rather than there's a purpose and a clear outcome and a measurable finish. And I'm wondering if that isn't addressed and it spills into virtual meetings. It can look like a whole bunch of people just chatting and they wonder, what did that hour go? I don't know where it fits in the model here, but because you'd think you'd want to have a clear purpose and a measurable outcome for every meeting. But I think that missing is magnified virtually, the problems that creates, and people can, and so we can be guilty of being just online in a lot of meetings now and not any more productive, you know. So I'm not sure where that fits in the model, but I've just noticed that that's looming there all the time.
That's a good point, Greg. I know we did cover that in a previous webinar as well, and I have a feeling we might have some of that covered in the team section, but it's a great call out. I mean, people, and especially to your point, the authenticators, especially who want to be useful and know that their time isn't being wasted, need an even more explicit awareness of what are we trying to achieve? Firstly, why is this meeting essential that we have it, and what are the targeted outcomes, and what's my own personal role in making that happen, you know, let alone the to-do list that you want to walk away with. So yeah, great call out. Thank you. Anyone else?
Paul, I was just wanting to speak about managing energy for people, because we are working at home and in offices, that, you know, to be really conscious of getting out and outside for that hour that we're meant to do exercise, and to really look at how we're managing our energy throughout the day, so that's healthy for ourselves as well as for others. So we're happier and easier to live with. So I mean, I love getting out for a morning walk, and if I don't get that, I get a little bit titchy. So it's just being conscious of what your energy is like with regards to ID. I'm an improviser, so it's important for me. And secondly is, I think people are a little bit self-conscious sometimes about being seen on videos for virtual. And so what I'm finding is sometimes I'm needing to invite people in a lot more to discuss topics and to express themselves and communicate. So that's my observations.
Yeah, thank you. I would encourage those of you, when you are leading teams, to make video on as the default. I mean, sometimes it affects bandwidth, so I understand why you know, some people it may not be, you know, effective really to have video on at the same time. But where you can have the bandwidth, I think it makes such a difference. And I know in our team communications, the video on is the default expectation.
Mm.
Paul, can I add to that, please? It's Steve Johnson. You may see on my video that I've actually included my name on the screen, and Zoom allows you to play with the background, but you can also put your company name and your own name up.
Yep.
So people, when you're speaking, people know who is actually speaking. So when you're doing international meetings, like I do a number of them, people know who you are and they're not guessing.
Well, and for those of you who've got ID in your team, you might see like Ian's done with his, you can put the name Steve, and then the 8363 for Ian is his ID.
Yeah.
And so that way when people are seeing the person speak and they're familiar with the language of ID, they can automatically be reminded of that person's ID as well.
Yeah, very good.
Thanks, guys. Let's keep moving just in the interest of time. I'll keep moving along. So let's talk about team. So what's different with teams? When you think about team dynamics, what's different there with a virtual team and what you experience versus working when you're live? So I'll throw some things up to get started, and then we can discuss it as a group as well. So the very obvious one is the work environment. You know, we're now working with different technology. Our facilities and equipment can be different. Getting access to people is different. You know, they're just not automatically in front of you. They're just sort of grab for a couple of minutes here and there. And it's also much easier to be distracted, whether it's by your own work colleagues who just ping you, or whether it's family issues. But there's all sorts of different dynamics, you know, challenging people's time. So that's the first thing I would call out. Teamwork itself, you know, we often say that the best way for a team to be an effective team is to be together as a team. And the notion of being together is more challenging. So teamwork and camaraderie isn't as easy or as natural as it used to be. And yet on the other hand, people need to be empowered even more. They're working on their own. They need to be more empowered than ever. And then of course, another obvious one is that disconnection and isolation is really significant for a bunch of people. I mean, already a lot of people would say wherever the headquarters of a business was, they'd say, well, we're not a headquarters. So, you know, we often feel like the stepchild anyway, because they were remote. Even if they were working in an office, they felt somewhat disconnected from where the epicenter of the business was. But now you've got epicenters everywhere, you know, and so this isolation factor is huge. And for people who are people and extroverts and so on, especially if they're living on their own, like the younger generation, you might think are more flexible and so on, there's already, you know, a lot of commentary occurring around how lonely and isolated that can feel for them. But what that does in the team dynamics is it very quickly erodes away at trust and creates a suspicion that may not have been there as much before. And when it comes to the work effort and behavior and communication, it's very easy to get misaligned compared to where things were before. So, you know, it's got a lot of upside working virtually, but the team dynamics can be very challenged by this type of dynamic. What about you guys? What else do you see in a team context?
I think the conversation changes virtually. You are so mindful of not wasting a person's time that it's all business and less pleasantries. And especially in a situation like now, we need to inject more pleasantries.
Great call. Great call. I know we talked about that with a bunch of people last week, Jackie, you know, in the webinar we did last week. It's just really imperative that you spend the first few minutes having that small talk, as it were, just checking in with each other. Yeah.
Paul, this is John. One thing, I absolutely have not figured this out yet, but one thing I'm trying to work my way through is, looking back, I think I had a hierarchy of the kind of meetings I would have with my teams, and I would probably unconsciously pick different formats to do different things. So I'll give you an example. I might have a difficult conversation coming up, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to wait till because I'm going to see that person, and I'd rather do that in person.
Yep.
or, you know, that's not really I'm going to do this through email, and that's a phone call. And sort of, for me, the highest order of magnitude of that has been removed. And so learning to have really important meetings or really difficult meetings in the same forum as you have your chit chat meetings has been like, that's been something I haven't sorted out. And I've got, the way it's shown up is my team will sometimes say, gosh, you know, when I see you on video, it seems great, but we're getting disconnected through your emails. Like, you seem like angry in your emails. And I'm started going, oh, am I being more direct in certain forums now, and knowing that I'm gonna, and I haven't gotten it right yet. I know that. I know, like, if I have a big meeting, I'm still wearing my baseball cap sometimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not right. I haven't quite sorted out how to figure out the right forums and how to use video differently for different types of meetings. We're getting forced to do it because we're doing more of it with customers, but I don't know if others have found that, but I'm finding that sort of distracting my own rhythm. Like, it used to be instinctual. Oh, that one's a call, that's a meeting, I'm going to wait till I see that person. Now it's all kind of blending together.
That's very interesting, John. The webinar next week is on virtual meetings, so let's make sure we factor some of that into that meeting, you know, to that discussion too. But I'd be interested if anyone else has any comment to respond to you today.
Yes.
Paul, oh, sorry, go on, Susan.
I was just going to say about, I was just going to mention virtual etiquette, you know, and I guess that was a typical example of Ian just wanting to speak at the same time as I do. That there's a protocol around who speaks, who doesn't, who puts their hand up, you know, when's their turn. It's just a little bit more structured than a normal average meeting. So I think it's just trying to work out the etiquette around it all, and still feeling comfortable and relaxed and spontaneous when you can. So over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Susan. No, I was just going to make a quick comment for John. I was just thinking, I was seeing you there with your baseball cap, and maybe your sign is, if you've got a serious conversation, you take the baseball cap off, and then for the so you've actually got like a sense of, no, this is serious, so I actually have to put the baseball cap down. But when it's a bit more playful, I'll have the cap on. It just sort of, it's like we talked the other week about dressing for the work. Maybe that's sort of going to be a sign for you to, when you're having the real, which is the really deep and heavy conversations versus more light and playful.
I think it's going to be like, I moved my whole space down to the basement because my wife took over my regular office and my kids need study spaces. I got banished to the basement, so I had to redo my basement. But now that is one of the thoughts I had, Ian. That's super helpful. That, you know, hey, when I've got a big meeting, I'm going to prepare for it like I usually do. I'll go upstairs. Maybe I'm going to put on a nicer shirt. I'm going to come down and I'm just going to, you know, get myself, like you said, I'm going to show up, Paul. I have to just be a little more conscious of that, because you can get lost in the flow because you're just, you know, you're sitting in the same space all the time.
Right, right.
Just from a visual point of view, I'd lose the hat anyway, because it hides about a third of your head and your eyes, and it puts a shadow on your face. So that sends a nonverbal message, irrespective of what the content is. And you might actually have different hats, even maybe some without a brim, some for different meanings. But the brim of the hat does make the visual change a lot, because we only have these little squares we're looking at.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So I only wear the hat like after 5 o'clock. So I'm on the East Coast of the US. So it's 5 o'clock and I put the hat on, and then I have different hats. We have virtual happy hour. I have my Fiesta hat for that. But I should be more hat conscious. I will be. That's very good feedback.
Good.
I think someone else mentioned it before about the democratization of relationships, and I think it's a big one for teams. You know, a few of the senior leaders in our business have had a few calls now where, you know, we're getting communications and emails and calls from people that normally wouldn't, you know, walk past your office and kind of keep walking because you're buried in something, or you're visibly busy or concerned with something you're working on. But now that visual cue's gone, so people are just more than happy to drop an email on things that otherwise would normally been, you know, something they defer to someone else or address for someone else. So I think that democratization of relationships is good from a bottoms up approach, but from a top down, it's a whole new dynamic to manage.
Thanks, Gibaldo. So let's talk about what to do about some of these things. And I'm, you know, again, please share your comments on it as well. In terms of, let me just call out a few of these. Some of them are maybe fairly self-explanatory. One of the things I would call out is to not rely on surveys when you're working virtually. A lot of people are saying, oh, I've got the pulse survey, I've got the engagement scores, and that's telling me what's going on with my team. It's so, firstly, I would say most people that I get to talk to about those, firstly would say there's a fair high level of inaccuracy about them. Second, because they often answer in a way they think is what the person's going to want to hear or tolerate, or so it won't incriminate them. But there's quite a gap between what the score says and the truth. But I will also tell you that there's an increasing noise around engagement scores being a poor read of where you want your team to be. Like I've had people say to us, for example, I'm engaged, but have they asked whether I'm thriving? Have they asked whether I like it? Whether this is where I really am playing at my best? And I think if they could do a thriving survey, for example, I think that would be a better thing to go by. But I think, and I'm not saying don't do them at all. I mean, in some cases, it's part of the company's protocol that you do it. But don't rely on those as a way of connecting with your team. And I've found many, you know, senior leaders especially, as a way of trying to keep the pulse on their organization, maybe talk directly to their L1 layer, maybe some L2s, but they rely on surveys to give them a read on deeper into the organization. And I think virtual teaming is calling for you to have a more human connection and make the time to do that. But think about measuring, and I mean this conversationally, are my people thriving as opposed to just being engaged? Engaged is getting, the notion of engagement is getting a fairly big yawn these days. You know, even though it's still used very pervasively, it's not giving the value back to a true read of what's going on. I would call that out. The second thing is, if you get people giving, you know, I'd say to you, do a peak performance check. But if you get people scoring below, like 6 or below, you want to call that out and have a conversation with them. Most times when someone is a 4 or less, we would say to you on our experience with that scoring, a 4 or less is a flight risk. So if you're checking in with your team, like say once a month, and saying, hey guys, on a scale of 0 to 10, let's just whip around the team and do a little pulse check on how everybody is. And you can get, you know, it's your job as a leader to create a safe environment for that conversation. But when you do that, it's a great thing for you to know as a leader of how the team's going. It's great for the trust and camaraderie in the team to share at that level. But if you hear someone who's coming up with a 6 or below, you know, have that conversation with them. Like, it might be offline, best to have it, but go and have a conversation, because something's going on for them to come up with that score, and you might be able to help with it. It might be something personal and they don't need you to help or don't want to even fully disclose it. But check in, because if it goes too low, that person is enduring a level of stress that is not healthy. It's not helpful to their work, but it could also make them a flight risk. I found that 4 and below is a flight risk score. I just would call that out for you. And the other one I'll just quickly call out is assuming positive intent. You know, this has been a game-changing protocol. Anyone who's worked with us over the last few years doing team development work will always hear us implementing this protocol as one of our 3 anchor protocols for installing trust into a team. It's an easy thing to say, assume positive intent. It's a much harder thing to do, and to do consistently, and especially when you're working remotely. As the leader of the team, you of all people need to role model that. And when I say the leader of the team, or to play a leadership role on the team, assuming positive intent and calling that out in the team is a huge contribution that you can make for the team. And finally, I'm just going to refer to the 2 last points. Team development work, we would have said with live teams, you do something together as a team once a quarter. That was the rhythm of high performance teams. In virtual teams, and especially in a crisis, you need to be checking in with the team about how they're working as a team, on a monthly basis. So it steps up the frequency to be still at that high performance level. And the mentoring and buddy systems, which I know not everyone uses, but a lot of people use them for onboarding processes to sort of provide that support to someone in the first 90 days or so of their onboarding. But those systems for both mentoring and the buddy system can be continued beyond that time to really provide a better sort of cohesive fabric in the team when you're working virtually. Like, who do you have set up to be each other's buddies, to check in with each other? What are the mentoring roles people are going to be playing? So it's not all on you as the leader. You share that role with some other, not just your direct reports, but people who are maybe high potentials that can take on this mentoring role with other people across your organization as well. So there are some very specific things here that you can start to do differently to what you would do when the team is live.
Hey, Paul, I think there's something that I've heard our company do, and I hope that I can express this appropriately on the call. But what they've said to us right now is it's okay to be a B+ today. You don't have to be on your A game all the time in this situation. You have to get your work done. You have to speak with your manager if you need some help. But don't expect that you're going to be the straight A person in this environment.
That is a really great point, Jackie. That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. There is a certain tolerance and forgiveness factor, and especially through a crisis. I even had, I was telling someone yesterday, I was on a call with Cisco's All Hands the other day, and Chuck Robbins, who was the CEO, was being asked, how do you balance, you know, the family pressures from home? You need to be a little kinder to yourself, like when kids come and distract you. And as if it was planned, he said, like, the camera wasn't on him, he said like this, and his little grandchild came and sat on his knee. And here they are talking to 70,000 people on a WebEx call, you know, and he's like, guys, we've just got to be kinder to ourselves with a lot of these expectations, you know. Yes, we want to be professional. Yes, we want to strive for excellence. But to your point, Jackie, we also need to be human about this. And, you know, there are times when we're not going to be able to give our very best, and don't be hard on yourself about it. Great point. Anybody else? On some of these points, by the way, if any of you would like to understand them in more detail, please feel free to check in with either myself or one of my team after, or not just after the webinar, but at any time, and we're happy to elaborate on some of these and you know, how we make these things happen in teams. So the how, this is a couple of things I've mentioned already, but think thriving instead of engaging. I think that's a great new mindset when people talk about having a strategic mindset. That is one of the things you can do right now is think, okay, what am I doing? Am I thriving? Am I at my very best? Am I doing the work? Do I even know whether my people are thriving beyond just engage? You know, am I checking in and helping and providing a support structure for that to happen? Knowing their IDs, things like putting their ID scores in a chat when you're on a Zoom call or a WebEx call, you can, you know, make it as a protocol to do that. But you can also set up on our app, you can have your own team in a group, so you can see their scores at the ready. You know, you've got that really available to you all the time. One of the things you will have to do as a leader, and there's already a lot of commentary about this, is people become very task oriented when they're working virtually. Because they're so busy doing, it's very easy to be so focused on the task that you lose sight of why you're doing it. What's the strategic connection to the work that I'm doing? And so as a leader, whether you're the leader or you want to play a leadership role, keeping the why, you know, the vision, the mission, the cultural values, keeping that alive throughout the tasks is something that you have to really be even more intentional about as a leader. And as sensible and as easy it is to understand this, when you think of, if you sit through a virtual conversation, whether it's a meeting or just an interaction, and observe it, like someone said before, it's easy to get straight to the work and not cover off the niceties. I think that, Jackie, you were saying some of that. But the same is true about the strategic connection. Like, why are we doing this? And what's the stakeholder value? What's the strategic value? What's the customer experience? And not just the company's version, but when you hear stories about that, like customer experience or employee experience stories, sharing them and keeping that energy alive in the team needs to be done with much more intention than what it's ever been done before. And then the two last points, I would like to call these out. One of my own personal standards in a meeting is probably every hour, I just say to myself, has it mattered that I'm here? Like, really mattered that I'm here? And if it hasn't, then I'll use Jackie's point and give myself a B+ and try and step it up for the next hour. You know, like, what can you, and it could just be encouragement, it could be a smile, it doesn't always have to be a piece of genius insight. It could just be a pat on the back with somebody, but make it matter that you're there. And it's challenging because when it's so easy to be hidden in a team, that one, it's, you know, it's easy to miss. But I would say, whether it's for you, it's every hour or just somewhere in the meeting, making sure that you matter. Because if you don't have that visibility, but in a way that's of constructive value, it's very easy for your brand to get quickly diluted in a virtual environment. Some of you have heard me use this term previously about floating all boats, but one of the most, I think, aspirational contributions you can make in a team is when your presence increases the contribution, the standards, the confidence of everyone else. If they feel better, are better, can be better, you know, because of your encouragement, your energy, your questioning. If you raise the bar, not by being, you know, the hard person, but by being someone that can raise the tide, raise the expectations, play to a higher standard, but be that person for your team. I think that's a really wonderful thing to aspire to be, and especially in a virtual environment. With the changes that are occurring right now, I think that's a wonderful new aspiration for many people to strive for in how you contribute to your team.
Paul, I think my observation's been for numbers, I think we've got 20 on this call, but more than about 8, it can tend for some of us, such as myself, to think you don't want to, you know, you've got a time constraint, you don't want to be adding in and doing things. So I think that point you made of maybe, I don't know, the smile, although you don't necessarily see everyone's picture all the time, it is a tough one. And yeah, look, the point I'm about to make's been made by others, or those sort of things sort of tend to have you not say. But I agree with you, though, your share price does diminish. I'm not doubting.
Well, and you could use chat, Richard. You know, some of what you could be doing could be not as visible to everyone else, but it might be at least visible to a few individuals. My point is, you're trying to both contribute to the team and protect your brand, and you can certainly still protect your brand by making a contribution, you know, through things like a chat room at the same time. So even being conscious of it, there might be some meetings where you don't get to say anything at all. I just think it's a very good standard to be aware of, so that over the course of time, your brand is one that, you know, you're seen as someone who really is valuable in meetings, and, you know, that's good for the team and good for you.
Yep.
Paul, I've seen 2 things that I think worked really well right now. The first one is to inject humor. Some of the memes that are tasteful on social media are hysterical. And so in some of our meetings, in particular, the ones that are about the whole COVID situation, we always end it with a moment of levity, which is the best meme that we saw for the day.
Right, that's good.
And the other one is we've almost, like, I don't know if you call it spam mail or what you call it, but we've gone to inspirational quotes. And you have your name on the list. You send out your inspirational quote to 20 people, and then you put another name on the list that's already there, move it up to the top, and that person will then get 20 inspirational quotes. And it's cool because it doesn't have to even stay within your company, and to see where they come from and what they are, that can be very uplifting too.
That's lovely. Yeah, great ideas. Thanks, Jackie. Excellent. We'll add them into the mix here.
Paul, where do you think evaluations would fit into this in terms of certain meetings which have a particular purpose and outcome and so forth, not just checking in necessarily, maybe even that, but some way of saying, without hurting people's feelings, but giving some feedback to each other about how well that worked, or telling each other what I liked about it, what worked, what I would do differently, you know, what worked, what didn't, what will be changed. The risk is short comments can be hurtful, you know, like I say, I'd lose the hat, and I went, ooh, I really wanted to say da 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 da, but I shortcut stuff too much, you know. And I'm thinking, is there ways that we can check in on each other at the end of the meeting that says what we would keep, what we would change, and so forth?
Has anyone found a way of doing that that's working well for their team?
Okay.
So Greg,
you know, I don't know that I've done it in a in the moment kind of thing, but I did. I think I mentioned it earlier. When we all went virtual at my company, I did a 30-minute every morning midday for the East Coasters every day for 2 weeks, and then we decided it should be every third day, and now we were doing it twice a week, and people really like it, and we do virtual happy hours. But part of what we do is we ask that question, not in the moment, but I always say, how are we doing? And there is, and just leave space. It's really hard as a leader because you know, when there's silence on a call for a while, I always feel like, okay, I got to present, but like using 30 minutes with no agenda to say, how's everyone doing? Is everyone good? Anyone having any struggles, or anything you want to share? Anything that is feeling a little bit off or wrong? And sometimes it goes too long, and sometimes it's 10 minutes. And people are like, nope, we're good. So I don't know that we've cracked it, but at least I guess one thing that seems to be working is just there's value in creating the space. I ask, like, are these still working? Everyone's like, yes, we want to do this. We want to keep doing this. We have to do it regularly. And really gave positive feedback that that's a place to bring up just those things. And I've had people say, hey, you know what? This wasn't working for me, or you said this and I didn't understand it the right way. So it's become it's actually something that I was like, I need to do this to be a responsible manager. And now it's like something I really look forward to going. Like, it's like, sometimes it's really informal. Sometimes it turns into a business discussion. And it's always a place where we could talk about, you know, any of those kind of miscues or misunderstandings. That's the purpose. How are we doing in this virtual world?
thanks, John. And I would add, Greg, that when we talk about having the team development work being done with live teams quarterly or in virtual teams monthly, that is a time where you can check in and say, how are we doing as a team? You know, what's working, what's not working, what will we change? And I mean, someone said in the chat about what do we start, what do we stop, what do we continue? And if you have something specific, like if there's a particular meeting that you're wondering about, you could always bring that up then too. If, you know, often when people have to jump off a virtual call, there's not time to do the debrief on or the evaluation all the time. But as a, you know, as something you might do once a month to talk about the team or specific components of the team, like particular meetings, that's an opportunity to do that as well. Okay, guys, I'm going to just move on to culture in the interest of time, and talk about how the challenges that culture faces when you're working virtually. So the things that are apparent from the work we're doing already, I mean, teams struggle with culture at the best of times. Every organization has a culture. Whether it's the one they want is another point, you know, but defining the cultural values, having them be really clear and actionable values that people can see, how does that translate into my behavior, you know, and my prioritization of what I do and so on. Having that clarity, that's challenging at the best of times, even more so when it's virtual, because they're not as apparent. You don't have people in front of you all the time to keep them apparent. Misbehavior isn't as obvious. You can't see what people are doing, but any misbehavior is still destructive. So you've got the risk of something brewing up and becoming even toxic in a team that wouldn't have perhaps happened had you been working together physically. And then you've got added to now, as people get more and more used to working virtually, then it starts to expand the number of people that get included in terms of what time zones and geographies that they're from. And you've got to factor in cultural, like geographical cultural differences, let alone, the culture of the organization itself. So culture, I think working virtually is a very challenging area, and it's going to be some time before it might even poke its head up in terms of where is it really playing out. But I'm calling out that given it was challenging enough with the way organizations were working before, when yet everyone knows the value of a strong culture and the incredible pain that's caused when the culture is bad and worst case toxic. So it's an area that from a leadership point of view, I think deserves immediate urgent attention in how we are leading or playing a leadership role in a virtual space. What do you guys think about that?
I think you're less likely to have a chat about cultural problems in this medium than you might be when you bring them into your office and sort of have a chat with them. Calling anybody on things that are affecting the culture is going to have to be delicate, and maybe some things are better with a phone call, but you certainly wouldn't want an audience. So I think people might let things go a bit too far, let them not call stuff, not call on it. I think that's the danger.
That's spot on, Greg. Spot on. So guys, I'm conscious of the time. I want to call out something here for you. There are a number of things you can do. The first is, I'd say, get personally involved with culture. Like some people still will say, well, that's HR's area. And as a leader, you own culture, you set culture, you are a lighthouse of culture. So you need to really embrace the culture and be aware of where are you congruent and incongruent with culture, and get fanatical about it. Like as a leader, that is your role. The cultural values, there's nothing more important than vision, mission, and culture. And everything else hangs off the back of that, including strategy. So I've included here culture ahead of performance, because to Greg's point, it's so easy not only to miss it, but when someone might be performing well, it's very easy to want to be forgiving about their misbehavior around culture. And it will always, always come home to bite you. So in a virtual environment, being really clear and fanatical about your cultural values, and then holding people accountable to them, first of all yourself, but making sure that you don't let performance hijack culture is, I think, one of the most important things you can do as a leader in a virtual environment. And it's just so easy to let, because you want results and you're held accountable to results. It's so easy to let performance, be a victor, but it's always culture that. And I think if you're clear on that as a leader, it does make it a lot easier to police it. But it's the area that trips so many organizations up, is the conundrum between culture and performance. So other than that, for what you do yourself, I'll just finish with this. Being time zone sensitive, I know it sounds really simple, but boy, it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. That leaders, the coaching call I had before this call, the lady finished work at 4:30 a.m. this morning because of cultural insensitivity. Having physical reminders, like whether they be on slides or bringing them up verbally in your meetings, but making sure that those cultural values are sort of sprinkled into communication and interactions the way that you need them to be as the leader. That's a great role for you as a leader. And then, anytime you have stories or examples, calling them out. That's just what, anything you do to keep culture alive. I would implore you, as we move to a virtual way of working, that that's one of the most critical things you can do in a leadership capacity. Now, I'm aware we're out of time. So in fact, gone a couple of minutes over. So thank you for being on the call today. The slides and the recording will be posted on our website, and you'll be notified about that so you can have access to them again. And for those of you who are available, we have our next webinar next week, same time, on virtual meetings. Some of the questions you raised today we'll make sure we address in those meetings, in that webinar. Thanks very much, guys. Have a great day or evening.
Thanks, Paul.